To briefly explain the idea of simp files, I will explain this is not the same as my character analysis videos exactly. Well, it is. But due to my love for this character and because of a lot of videos I've seen trashing on said character due to certain panels, I felt the need to be a little less hostile than normal when critiquing. No, doesn't mean things they do aren't very, very, very bad. And no, I don't expect everyone to be sympathetic or empathetic to them. I just tend to lean more towards that side of people who wants to look more into why the character does things. In order to show that that's the case, I was going to call the video Why Does Dabi Do This Thing, but these different titles I came up with weren't eye-catching, and this is still a character analysis, so that title in particular wouldn't have fit the whole idea, and that sort of applied to the rest of them. But then, the Simp Files was born. I'll be real, I'm not expecting this to be a recurring thing at all, but I wanted it clear that I do have a love for this character that may not be the same case for others, so I wanted to be straight up with you before diving in. Even if you don't like him though, I feel like I did come up with some interesting information to do this analysis, and I feel I did push myself to be harsh when necessary. And another note, these analysis videos are mostly for fun for me, so if I mention any disorder involved with the character, I'm not meaning to formally diagnose them, as I don't have the authority or the degree to, and I also don't want people thinking everything about a diagnosis applies to real life. So don't take everything I say as something to apply to a person in real life, with certain traits I mention in these videos. This is mainly just fun for a simp who loves to talk about her favorite characters. So, let's start the video. Listen, for weeks I have been working on this Miyuruma video, and rereading Kimetsu no Yaiba for Kokushibo's and Muichiro's and possibly Inosuke's analysis as well. But look, something came up and I couldn't help talking about it because I may be a bit of a simp. I am. But I swear I will put my simp feelings aside and make a totally unbiased video. I hope. So, the war arc of Boku no My Hero did subvert my expectations. Months ago, I made up some deranged theories. If you guys don't mind, I just want to vent them so everyone can laugh at my dumb ideas. In my defense, I called a big twist in Kingdom Hearts 3 happening, but it was a joke, and I regret every day that I didn't make a video about it before the game released. And while these theories won't hold up anymore because they didn't happen, they're still funny in my mind because I thought of really stupid things. Okay, my first theory was during this arc, Shinzo and Aizawa would share a Peter Parker and Tony Stark moment, the whole I don't feel so good Mr. Stark moment. But then I realized Shinzo wasn't even there. So my next thought was, okay, well, Aizawa, by all accounts, has kind of fulfilled his plot role. While he is everyone's teacher, technically he could be killed and people would be upset, but as someone obsessed with Danganronpa, I am used to that kind of thing happening. Surprisingly, it didn't. That was honestly the idea I was certain would come true. My last idea is the dumbest one by far. That being when Hawks falls out the window and hits his head. I just about expected that he would have amnesia of some sort, but then I took it a step further and thought, what if Dabi kills Endeavor this arc, turns to an amnesiac Hawks, and then tells him that he's a member of the League, and the reason his wings are burned off is because Endeavor did it in self-defense as Hawks murdered him. How wild would that have been? That would have put this man's psyche in a blender and been the most 300 IQ play by Dabi. I mean, Fire Emblem Three Houses showed me that doing a Lion King arc works in other media, and I was playing Kid around the time I considered this dumb theory, so that's probably where all that kind of came from. Please like and subscribe. I'm sorry for my dumb ideas. I'm sorry. But the one theory I didn't expect to finally be confirmed in this arc, because after all this time, I just wasn't thinking about it anymore. Dabi being Touya Todoroki. I was not expecting this to be mentioned at all. But the way it happened was so well done, in my opinion, considering how obvious it was, so much so that I had already been using their names interchangeably because I was just expecting it fully. Now, more recently, more chapters about his backstory have released that genuinely bumped Dabi up from a character I liked for no real reason, he's just a character archetype I like, to one of my favorite characters in the series. That may be a hot take, I'm not really sure, but for me personally, I love the character a lot. One of the first things I knew I wanted to do when thinking about this video was research the name Touya for any relevant meanings. For people who don't know, Horikoshi tends to use kanji as symbolic meanings for character names. Before, all I had to go off of was Immortal Peachtree, which is ironic, though if the theory that his quirk involves turning to ash then reforming like a phoenix turns out to be true in the future, I will amend this. But another meaning that caught my attention was found here on this website. The toe part can mean small fire that illuminates surroundings, and in kanji means lantern. We can assume that this is a reference to him exposing the Todoroki family scandal to the world. The fire imagery also makes me personally think of Prometheus, who gave fire to humanity. Fire can be helpful to the people and represent knowledge, but can also be deadly. And for giving knowledge of fire to mankind, Prometheus angered the gods, leading to him being tortured for eternity. Touya deliberately exposes the crimes against family done by Endeavor, giving knowledge to the people of how hero society can be corrupt. One could even say that the price Touya paid was his own morality, sanity, and body. He himself willingly killed people just to make a point. While it was something he was clearly doing in spite of Endeavor, and him saying he was made to do it because of his own upbringing isn't true, as he acknowledges wrong, it was effective in opening the eyes of the public. In turn, the public turned to anarchy. While for some people it's good, some heroes are being brought down a peg, as not all are good at their jobs and some mistreat others in need due to status, which can be seen as a good aspect of fire that helps people and represents knowledge, but the destructive nature of fire represents the anarchy now happening as a result. Another interesting thing about a small fire that illuminates surroundings is that it makes me think of something like a candle. That's definitely a small fire that's used to see. But when you leave a candle like that neglected, it could cause a much bigger fire, very similar to what we see happen with Touya. He is far too neglected as a child, to the point that he begs people to just look at him and pay attention, all to end up erupting into a large fire at the end of the Part 2 chapter. There could also be a point to be made that if Touya had not been neglected and instead his parents put in enough effort to talk to him and work things out, things might have been different for him and he could have possibly been a big brother who inspired and supported Shoto, which was the overall point to having more kids in the first place. Maybe they could have made a compromise for Dabi to train with Shoto, where Endeavor teaches them both how to control their power, similar to what Endeavor does for the trio. Sure, it's wishful thinking and we don't know, but it's interesting to think about. The second part of his name can also mean arrow, and an arrow can often represent a specific goal, which fits Touya's character so well. He is fixated very much so to an excessive point sometimes. Like becoming a hero and getting approval was an obsessive goal to a point that he did it at the expense of his own body. Then a much more obvious goal later in his life was to expose the Todoroki family and destroy hero society, as well as Endeavor himself, which he has arguably achieved as of this moment in time. Arrows can often represent a form of protection due to the god Apollo who it represents, who is also a god often associated with fire, though it is often argued whether he really is or isn't. Point being, it is associated with it, and could show that as a child, Touya really did want to be a hero who was seen as a protective symbol, though it was more so to be strong, which leads me into one other symbolic meaning to arrows: power and control. This is important because Touya's obsession with control and power is honestly almost disturbing in a way if the story continues pushing this idea. He wants to be the strongest even if it kills him, and he absolutely takes control when he can. We can see him lead the Vanguard Action Squad, become a general for the Paranormal Liberation Front. Even when he's initiating Hawks, he decides to send a high-end Nomu after him just because he could. We see him totally dominate the war arc at the end by crushing Hero Society through his video he shows, becoming the MVP of the arc to the villains. and the sheer amount of joy he's taking control of the situation is almost maniacal. But then, according to the backstory, his emotions often cause him to lose this control he's so obsessed with having, and it carries into adulthood. His flames noticeably become more erratic during scenes where he's fighting the Todorokis. In a twist of irony, we also never see Dabi injure himself until recently. Obviously, he was injured beforehand, all over, but we've never seen him do it until the war arc. He burns to the point that he loses feeling in his hand, which is interesting. Why did he hurt himself here? Either it's just the amount of times he's been doing it, which is extremely possible, especially since he partially does it after throwing out a wall of flames, but given the chapter where it's revealed emotions make his flames stronger and more erratic, I'd say it's more to do with how he was fighting Shoto in Endeavor and the buildup of excitement to do it. I think he used so much power on them during his Flame Fist, it injured him further. It all accumulates the idea that his control is an integral part to him. Just recently, I've been watching a lot of analysis videos on Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. While not the same character, Touya often is compared to her, most likely due to the fact that Shoto often gets compared to Zuko. Not because they're the same, but there are similarities. And something someone by the name of Hello Future Me pointed out, since it's been years since I last saw the show, so it's been a long time since I thought about this, but Azula is always shown with her hair perfectly symmetrical, and this is a big deal because later when she begins having delusions, becoming paranoid, this is symbolized through her cutting her hair in a way that makes it very uneven. Earlier in the story, she is always in control of conversations and controlling others through manipulation. But when others betray her, she loses her control and starts having visions of her mother, which makes her spiral more and more. Why do I bring this up? Well, when we see Dabi, ironically in the start of the story, looking at him, his scars are extremely symmetrical. They're perfectly placed on his face and seemingly his body, and he is in control of every conversation and group he is in. Now, during the war arc, it's revealed that his scars are actually not perfectly symmetrical when he shows them on his chest. The scars on his shoulders are uneven as well, showing that, while he gives off an aura of complete control and dominance, he's actually hiding an extreme lack of said control. This could refer to his emotions, which he needs to keep in check in order to have control of his quirk as well. There's also another possibility that his eyes being blue, which could also apply to Enji as well, could represent a cold side or a calm side based on the coloring if you base it on color symbolism. Red spiky hair is often used to represent fire user type characters in stories due to the design giving them a destructive type of look of sorts. But the fact that his hair turns white can represent stress and sickness, obviously. Though the transition between his hair turning from red to white and splotches can add on to this idea that he lacks control of situations in his life. And it shows. His father begins to neglect him no matter how hard he tries to get attention. Shoto being born was out of his control and causes him more pain, and he claims that his mother mistreats him by being married to his father and giving birth to him at all. Touya lacking this control is one of the main factors that pushes him over the edge, along with the neglect from his family, including Natsuo, who had become tired from hearing Touya talk about how his father treats him all the time. Which honestly would probably be most people's reactions if someone vented to them about the same thing constantly, especially when you're the younger sibling. Touya would have been upset he didn't listen to him that last time, but considering it was probably one of the few times, if not the only time, Natsuo didn't hear him out, I would hesitate to make it the main reason, except since Touya was only 13, we also have to include the fact that someone that age isn't guaranteed to think logically. That moment probably is something that pushed him over the edge to make himself push to do better for acknowledgement elsewhere. And likely since Fuyumi mentioned not wanting to see Touya get hurt, he wrote her off as that was always going to be her answer, when to him getting hurt was just a small price to get stronger. As long as he was given attention, he was okay with the pain. Physical pain to him was nothing compared to emotional, and hurting himself also happened to be one of the only ways he was given attention. And speaking of attention, it's interesting to note that Touya, after his hair turned white, is not the only League member, aside from Kurogiri, who is given no red in his design, but also the only child in the Todoroki house with no red whatsoever in his design. This could likely symbolize the lack of attention he would be receiving from his parents, as red is a color that stands out and is noticeable. And now his color palette is swapped to blues and blacks, which are the opposite colors. I feel like it would all go back to the neglected candle that doesn't stand out, as it's small, but it can be incredibly deadly when not noticed. Touya is someone who could be associated with the people nobody recognizes who commit crimes, and nobody would have expected it because they were never noticed that person. Of course, Dabi's scars are always what makes him notice. He hurts himself and people pay attention, and now he hurts other people because it gets him attention. Which leads me into the consequences of neglect. When the chapter dropped that showed Touya attempting to hurt Shoto as a baby using his quirk, a lot of people wrote it as him being a psychopath in the making. And on one hand, when we see him as an adult, I can see where this would be the case. Though I also have to bring up that psychopathy is not as black and white as many people make it out to be, and I also hesitate in saying that someone who couldn't have been older than 10 years old at that point is diagnosable. Did he try to hit Shoto? Yes. But in a child who is being neglected, this isn't the most uncommon thing. It's common for children to lash out at whoever is getting attention, especially a younger sibling in a lot of situations. And it's not like Touya acted like it was justified. In the next chapter, he says he knows what he did was wrong and wishes people wouldn't just keep their distance from him, or rather that Enji wouldn't stay away from him and keep Shoto away as well. And he even tells Endeavor he thinks Shoto will have competition with him when he is testing his quirk in a way that makes me think he wanted to train with Shoto, rather than anyone be kicked away, though I may be reading too much into that scene. The point is, a child neglected so much doing that isn't actually shocking in the least. Now, another thing that makes me not want to diagnose him is that a lot of this has to do with learned behavior. For example, obsessive behaviors are a bit common in multiple disorders, including psychopathy, but we can't forget that the person who instilled this behavior into him from a young age was his father Enji. Touya had been taught that the most important thing in life is strength and being better than others, and this pushes him to be obsessed with it just like Enji is. Something my friend pointed out to me is that in the Pro Hero arc, Endeavor tells everyone in the crowd to watch him be better and prove that he's the number one hero through his actions. He gets the attention from everyone, something that Touya was obsessed with not having from him. The difference being that Touya never got this, and Endeavor didn't realize at the time because he never bothered with trying to get attention from people close to him. Now Touya has been gaining the public's attention by perpetrating these crimes. As an adult, with lack of tear ducts, I think Touya has turned any emotion he feels into excitement in a lot of ways. When Twice is killed by Hawks, Touya says he can't cry and he's upset because they lost a strong ally, which at first seems pretty cold. But then you see how much fire he uses against Hawks, and it makes me wonder, is it really Hawks' betrayal that caused it? I mean, you've already seen him erupt and attack him after Hawks does so, and he almost hits Twice in the fire. This could be a lack of caring, but he also lacks control at times. Irresponsible, yes. But he does say he expected Hawks to save Twice, as a hero always tries to. And he attempts to give Twice the chance to run so he can finish off Hawks. And there's just so many scenes of Twice being so nice to Dabi that aren't pointed out, and Twice is just way too nice to Dabi sometimes. Like, way, way too nice. Twice is great. But then, the most symbolic scene of all. I hate fish. Fish is something served most everywhere in Japan, and is very popular in Japanese cuisine, so to dislike it may symbolize that Touya is an outsider, even among the other villains. Makes sense considering he's the son of the number one hero. Fish often represents the unconscious of higher self, feelings, and motives. Clearly, the deeper meaning behind Touya hating fish is because emotions cause him nothing but pain. Okay, I'm stretching here. And I'll admit, I don't actually think there was meant to be a big deal like that, though it is interesting trivia in a way. I think more likely it just has to show that he doesn't belong in the group the same way everyone else does. Rather, he's distant. He appears antisocial, though I still don't want to quite say it's antisocial personality disorder. I think he's just someone who's built up walls as a direct result of his childhood trauma and his quirk. I've seen a lot of people point out that he seems to be less involved with the League as the group, which is true. though I also do see a lot of times he's more involved than people may notice. Touya seems friendly with him, and she's not one to hold back if she has a dislike for someone, even in the league. Twice, of course, is seen working with him a few times, which of course Twice gets along with everyone. And Dabi does seem to care a little bit when Touya is upset. Some could argue because he wants more power on his side, and Touya getting killed due to recklessness could cause damage to the league, but at the same time, for someone emotionally distant, that's a pretty big thing for him to care about. It also takes out the idea that he's narcissistic, in my opinion. He acknowledges he isn't the only one needed on the team. He's genuinely in the know that other people are required for operations the league has. Due to his childhood, it's more likely he's developed an inferiority complex after all this occurred. He seems confident, and not a lot can be said to back up his inferiority complex idea. If anything, he seems more likely to have a superiority complex, right? Well, in a lot of ways, this can go hand in hand. A superiority complex is an exaggerated sense of self-worth. It hides real feelings of mediocrity. An inferiority complex is an overstated feeling of weakness. It often hides true motives, such as aspirations for power. Based on those two definitions, I lean towards Dabi having a bit of both complexes, which is also possibly supported by his jealousy of Shoto still being very much on display, even though as a child he says he understands that he has been in the wrong. Likely because he didn't develop a bond with Shoto, he sees him as more like a trophy of endeavors than a brother. Likely because Shoto looks both like his mother and father, Touya has a stronger disdain for him when looking at him. Hard to say, as we don't get much insight in how Dabi sees his family other than he holds a grudge over the neglect he felt growing up, as well as the pain caused by his father, instilling this obsession in him, and, as he says to Rei, the pain of being born due to her agreeing to have kids with a man who didn't really want them, while she too didn't want them. I can also argue that Dabi may see himself as only a tool rather than a person. He was Endeavor's tool, but now considers himself the embodiment of Stain's philosophy, and he pushes the idea that his fire isn't his own, much like Shoto did at the start, but we aren't to the parallels yet. He considers it Endeavor's fire, even though it's stronger. Because he was born to be a doll to Endeavor, that's what he considers himself, and that's backed up by how he refers to Shoto as Endeavor's doll. They exist essentially to be dressed up as heroes without being taught what it really means to be one. The push for it is there, but there's no substance. You can argue that the neglective abuse affects Dabi in a super stereotypical way if you look into psychological effects of neglect. Like, he exhibits a lot of signs of neglective abuse. It can stunt your brain growth in the worst case scenario, for example, which can cause emotional processing to be stunted, memory deficiency, which you see when he forgets who Snatch was, even though he was the one who brought up family to him. Decision making and emotional regulation can be stunted, which you see very often when he can be over emotional, especially during his reveal, where he's not sad or angry, he's excited and dancing, he's so happy. And left brain, right brain communication, which is directly tied to how you react to certain things, which is another form of emotional stunting, which is also seen when he gets excited and cries, or smiles and gets excited when fighting Hawks after Hawks is killed twice. While I'm a certified simp, I'm not going to sit here and say Touya did nothing wrong. He made his bed, and he'll gleefully lie in it. He even would douse the sheets in kerosene himself. What I will say is that there's a lot of background and small details to his personality that make him a complex and interesting character. While it would be easy to write him off as nothing more than just some other sadistic villain with family issues driven by revenge and jealousy, doing so would mean ignoring the small but important details about his thoughts and actions, and we've all seen how ignoring those has worked for Endeavor so far. I honestly do see how neglect has carried to him in childhood. He has a strong antisocial behavior that is pretty common when a child is neglected. But he is also very attention-seeking in a lot of ways. For example, sending doubles of himself made by Twice and antagonizing everyone with his villain monologues. The killing of people in broad daylight in the middle of the streets as well. He does most of his crime in broad daylight, as a matter of fact. He's even excited when people say they recognize him as the one who did it. Even the patchwork job on him looks like a way to make him stand out. It worked as a way to cover his identity, destroy his tear ducts, to shut off his own emotions, and make himself learn not to cry and control his fire, even though that wasn't intentional, and as a way to be noticed. In some ways, you compare Touya and the strong sense of pride we see in him through flashbacks to someone like Bakugo, except unlike Bakugo, Toya's quirk was more than his body could handle and caused him an immense amount of pain to use. The result was a child having a quirk based on the intensity of their emotions in a state of physical and emotional trauma. And in a way, you can even see Shoto struggle with this pride during what we expected to have been an easy fight with Inasa. While Touya struggled with his quirk's nature because he wanted to help with being number one for his father, Shoto struggled with his quirk's nature because he wanted to reject that help. In a twist of irony, at the start of the series, Shoto treats Enji the way Enji treated Touya. At one point, he even tells Enji he forgot all about him when using his fire for the first time. I think this marks when Endeavor starts beginning to realize how much feeling forgotten can affect someone. By that point, recall that he still refers to his older sons as failures despite believing Touya is dead, which may only be in the anime, to be fair. I know he didn't say that in the manga. But I do recall my first time ever seeing that line, I feel like was in the anime, because I recall this being said at some point, and I thought it was really messed up. And oh boy, are there a lot of parallels between other characters. When Dabi reveals himself to be Touya, he tells Endeavor you reap what you sow. Endeavor taught Touya to be obsessive and need acknowledgement, just like him. A few chapters later, when we see Dabi laying on a couch thinking about when he was a child and once again says, you reap what you sow, I guess. I personally interpreted the scene to refer to himself. Someone who kept doing what he could do to be the best, and he sowed into himself that he can do whatever it takes to be the best son for his father to acknowledge, resulting in his obsession with beating Endeavor. I also noticed that, just like we see from the Pro Hero arc with the art illustrating Dabi with the slime covering his face to match Endeavor's flames, we once again see Dabi's flames erupt on his eyes in the same shape as Endeavor's mask. There is also a point I brought up where I mentioned that Touya always wants people to look at him and watch him, almost like he got it from somewhere. And Bakugo says countless times how petty Endeavor is during their internships when Endeavor is determined to always sound like he's the best. Wonder if someone picked up that characteristic from him. While Dabi doesn't fully adhere to Stain's will, there is a point to be made there are parallels that are worth noting, such as their outlook on hero corruption. The only difference is, while Stain believes that there are some good heroes, Dabi sees no good heroes in the world since they would allow a tragedy such as his own to be swept under the rug. While we have never seen the aftermath of him after being burned, we can figure it may have been similar to Shigaraki, where people definitely saw them but nobody helped, because a hero could help them. I also doubt he would have easily accepted help given his aversion to it and not wanting to admit he is a quote-unquote failure. And there's Shoto, who I think is also a particularly interesting parallel. Shoto hated Endeavor to the point that he did the opposite of Touya and held back his power. Shoto always grew up hearing that he was a masterpiece, resulting in him having a bit of a superiority complex that was fragile, as when Endeavor said he will need to use his fire one day, Shoto overcompensated his ice in his fight with Sero. Touya is an interesting case where his inferiority complex makes him have a seemingly big ego when it's actually very fragile. While it can easily be contributed to feeling superior, I think it's the opposite. He compensates for his lack of superiority by being a control freak, essentially, seen when he becomes the leader of different groups and constantly planning for things such as knowing exactly where Hawks would be in the event they were betrayed, and having fire and smoke keep areas dark in addition to Mustard's poison gas during the summer camp arc, because while he didn't know the gas would go away, there was a backup plan if it did. You see Shoto attempt to be in charge of his test with Momo, doubting her abilities, but when he's easily beaten by Aizawa because of his own mistake, he realizes he has to have faith that she is a necessary ally. Wonder who else was beaten by Aizawa. Well, his double was anyway. recording this while editing, but a lot of this actually somewhat reminds me of baseball in Japan, based on what Weeby News' video said that I watched, where she talked about how they're trained until they're absolutely worn out and exhausted. I'm not super, well-versed in the culture, I guess you could say, so I only really know what I've heard from other things like that video. So, basically, some people even say it's abusive to players. I don't want to downplay those real-life stories, but I think there's a possibility that they may have inspired Horikoshi, especially with the Todorokis. Touya was basically a son who wanted to get good at baseball and show his father he could be the very best. Then along came a child prodigy who hit a home run before he could even walk, and got all the baseball gear and all the attention, but Touya kept trying and getting hurt over and over until the overwhelming pain physically and emotionally got to him. I don't know, it's an interesting analogy and idea to think about. I think I only considered it because I was watching that video and writing this analysis at the same time. But hey, I had an excuse to include a Beats Robinson's clip, so it's a win for me. I am interested to hear if anyone else has seen any parallels that they can think of for characters, or any that I didn't list, because I think it's really interesting how many people Touya does parallel to, and so if you want to leave a comment about it, that'd be pretty cool. I will say again, none of this is meant to be a Dabi Touya did nothing wrong thing. He himself clearly is self-aware that he's been doing things wrong. I've always found villains who are not completely redeemable to be some of my preferred characters, since you aren't expected to feel bad for them. Yet, maybe it's the simp part of me, but I have found myself to be feeling a bit sympathetic to him. I mean, when I remember he's killed a bunch of people and done things that contradict his goals, I don't feel as bad, but him as a child I feel incredibly bad for. Neglect isn't something to be taken lightly, as it can cause lasting and detrimental effects on a person through into adulthood. And Touya embodies this idea. He really felt that he had nowhere to go and no one who cared for him, and when he needed his father to just pay attention to him and watch him, he was ignored. Dabi is one of my favorite characters in My Hero Academia due to the nature of his childhood and how much symbolism was put into his character, if not my favorite. I know not everyone will agree, of course, but the more I've looked into things on neglective abuse and just Dabi in general, I can sense the love and dedication to story crafting that was poured into him leading up to the reveal. I feel Horikoshi's passion for this character in a lot of ways, due to all that you can interpret, and I love that very much. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. This was released quicker than the last one, thankfully. I would like to focus on either Miuruma or Muichiro next, so that is who we're aiming for. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you subscribe and like, and I appreciate just all of the feedback I've gotten on some of these videos, and just, I hope that people keep commenting other characters that they would like to see, because that'd be really cool. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. See ya!